Howdy folks, this is part 6 of our Gameolgy series on the survival horror genre. If you haven't checked out the other parts of this series, please be sure to check those out before checking out this video. So, in our last section, we discussed the importance of limited inventory and resource management in a survival horror game. It's essentially the survival aspect of the survival horror genre. The fact that you can only carry so much with you, and there's only so much of what you need to survive that you can utilize. These are very important aspects that I feel every survival horror game needs in order to work, but there are a few issues that can arise from this if they are done improperly, and there are a couple of solutions I've seen to the problems that they present that also can create issues. So let's discuss everything in them before we go to combat. So the first issue that can arise with resource management is the fact that you would need to backtrack a good deal. And this is because even though you can't carry everything with you in a survival horror game typically, there usually is a place you can store items in order to access them later if you need to. So as you just saw, the subspace storage bins, as people tend to call them, if there are items that you feel you don't need at the time, you can stash those away in that thing, and you can come back to them later if you need to. Now, that is good design, I would say, because it makes it a lot easier for you to pick and choose, and though some people might make fun of the storage bins because like your stuff seems to move around from save room to save room, it's better than the alternative, which is remembering where every little thing that you couldn't pick up at a time was in the levels, the maps, or anything, and then having to backtrack to them. Resident Evil actually tried to do something like that with Resident Evil 0, and it didn't necessarily work out too well. And it was especially bad in that game because due to the nature of the fixed camera angles, it wasn't uncommon for you to drop an item and have it be hidden behind something that you couldn't see, meaning that you would essentially lose that item unless you just happen to be pushing the button when you were over top of it. Now, the other issue that can arise from that, and this is the big one, is that due to the limited inventory, you'll find yourself backtracking a lot. So one of the things I don't like about early Resident Evil is that I often find myself doing laps. So I find an inventory item, and with everything else I have in my inventory is now full. I always want to have an empty slot in my inventory so that, I can pick up an important item instead of always having to backtrack to the storage bin. So I backtrack to the storage bin, I unload the inventory item because I don't know where that goes yet, so I can have an empty slot. Then I backtrack to where I was originally, continue forward, and discover that what I needed, that inventory item, was just right around the corner. So I gotta backtrack to the storage bin, get that inventory item again, and use it. And if it's a multi-use item, then I once again have to backtrack to the inventory bin in order to, make more space in my inventory. And it can just be really aggravating to just constantly have to go back and forth. And a lot of people would say it's a necessary evil that's required in a survival horror game, but I disagree. There is a solution to this problem. But a very specific solution. When Silent Hill came out, they introduced a solution to this problem where they just eliminated the storage bins completely, but instead they also eliminated the limited inventory space, period. Now, Silent Hill is a really good game, all things considered, but I never felt it was particularly effective as a survival horror game. And the reason for that is because since you can carry everything with you that you come across in the game, you're never having to pick and choose what you need. And due to such a focus on melee combat, it's pretty easy to keep yourself stocked with ammo, health items, and stuff like that, to the point where you always feel pretty well equipped to deal with the challenges at hand. So the solution to the problem Resident Evil has with the backtracking is not so easily fixed by just getting rid of the limited inventory space, because that's just gonna ruin the horror aspect of it, the survival aspect of it. I think a better solution to the problem is actually introduced in Resident Evil 4. In Resident Evil 4, you have the limited inventory space, but the difference between it and previous Resident Evil games is that everything in your inventory takes up a set amount of space, so you have to pick and choose what you want to carry with you. And of course, over the course of the game, you can increase your inventory space to hold more items and stuff like that, and over time you can get more well equipped. But the other thing about Resident Evil 4 is that there's no reliable way to restock your ammunitions and everything. You are still basically have to make do with what is available to you, which is why I still say it qualifies as a survival horror game. Not necessarily an effective survival horror game, but a survival horror game nonetheless. There is one tweak I would make with it though, and that's to, have a little less space. One of the problems with Resident Evil 4 is that due to how much space you have, you can carry a lot with you, so you can feel pretty well equipped. You do often have to improvise with what you have. You don't always have what you need for the task at hand, but you still can feel relatively safe in comparison to later games in the series. Something else that's interesting to note about Resident Evil 4 in comparison to Silent Hill and Resident Evil, the original games that is that whereas in those games, ammo drops and enemy encounters were, fixed, meaning they don't change outside of differences in the difficulty setting. In Resident Evil 4, you actually have randomized resource drops. So while you will find certain resources out in the world, when you take out enemies, they are going to drop resources. They'll sometimes drop health, they'll sometimes drop ammo, they'll sometimes drop currency. So because of that, you can get stocked, but at the same time, not to the point where, you feel safe. You're just still having to make do with what the game is giving you. But it can also lead to issues if there is a problem with the algorithm that determines what you get. A good example would be in the Dead Space series. If you play Dead Space with all 4 weapons in your inventory space, then it is going to play very similarly to a survival horror game. Because you're going to have to make do with what you got. You're going to have to pick and choose what weapons you want to use, and once your inventory is full, you're going to have to start making choices as to what you want to pick up and what you want to discard, which is what you want. However, you'll notice if you play Dead Space, if you only have 1 weapon in your inventory, then you can essentially become flush with ammo, because what happens is the algorithm recognizes that you have that 1 weapon, and then it will mostly give you ammo for that weapon. Now, of course, you'll still get drops for other weapons as well, but because now you have so much extra space in your inventory, you can hang on to that extra ammo for the weapons you don't have, and then you can sell those at the store and then spend money to get more weapons. So that's an example of randomized resource drops not really working out, and how it can really hinder the game in question. Yes, that's just something you really want to avoid. Really, randomized resource drop, randomization in any survival horror game, any game in general, is generally a bad idea, and I understand why a lot of developers want to do it. It is a lot easier to rely on an algorithm to give resources to the player instead of painstakingly going through levels and choosing how much ammo you want to leave here, how much you want to leave there, where the weapons are, stuff like that. But if you rely on the randomization, it's just going to cause all kinds of issues, as it does in Dead Space. Due to that system I mentioned, a lot of people don't consider Dead Space a survival horror game. And like a lot of the times, I kind of forget that it does qualify as one because I know the trick to make it a third-person shooter. It's just funny how that works. And it can only get worse if, in addition to that, you also have randomized enemy encounters. Now, a good example of this would be System Shock 2, which again, debatable whether or not it counts as a survival horror game. But resource management is still pretty prevalent in this one, so I do think it is good to talk about here. But if it was a survival horror game, it would be a very difficult and frustrating one because in addition to randomized ammo drops, randomized resource drops, you also have randomized enemy encounters. Enemies will respawn as you play System Shock, and that is a very, very frustrating thing. Because considering you only have so much to deal with them, and because you often find yourself going back and forth over the same areas, trying to find resources, complete objectives, and all that kind of stuff, you often do dilly-dally for a bit, and there's not a whole lot that you can do about that. Now, it's not to say that System Shock can't be a really good game. It's one of the best games ever, in my opinion, but it can be very frustrating for that reason. It doesn't always feel fair. It just feels like you have just a tiny amount of ammo and a never-ending flood of enemies coming at you, which in a sense can really add to the horror, I guess you could say, but at the same time, it just kind of feels like they're artificially making the game hard rather than making it genuinely challenging as it should be. Really, when it comes to resource management in a survival horror game, forgoing randomization in the enemy encounters and the resource drops is the way to go. The best thing to do is just, go through the levels, figure out where you're going to put the ammo drops, figure out where you're going to put the weapons, the health items, and any other resources that are expendable, and then just figure it all out, because God forbid you put efforts into a game when you're making it. It's always better to do things by hand, because if you just let the computer do it for you, that amount of effort's going to show. If you use randomization, if you rely on that, it's just kind of going to be a bland, uninspired experience. So yeah, those are some pitfalls that you really need to avoid with survival horror. Just like with the setting, pay close attention to it, and everything will just fall into place as you're making the game. But anyway, that's it for resource management, guys. Now it's time to talk about the one that I'm sure everyone wants to hear me comment on, and that is combat in a survival horror game. So tune in for that one.